Growing up the way I did, a black kid in these streets is fucking treacherous. And when I couldn't protect myself, Monet is the only person, the only one that was there to protect me. All right? I'm never going against my mother.
With Hail Mary playing in the background, what a way to send off Mary J. Blige. I referenced how we could be in for Power's very own Red Wedding, and what an absolute bloodbath. And who could have predicted? Monet was going to be the big casualty. In a blaze of gunfire, she was here being family first, putting herself on the line to save her son. And down goes Monet Tejada, the biggest death that we've seen since Power Book 2 Go started, and now it's a full-on war. But we're definitely going to dive into everything in a bit more detail, as usual, in this recap and breakdown for episode 9, which was written by Courtney Kemp herself, and I also believe Ashley Victoria Hudson, who definitely deserve their flowers for one hell of an episode. We're going to be focusing on all the major talking points from Married to the Game, looking at a bunch of clues, Easter eggs, along with a theory or two with how they could actually end Power Book 2 Ghost Season 4. We'll be focusing on the theme of chess moves from Carter and Tariq, how many are still married to the game, being family first, and how the death of Monet Tejada will shake up the Tejadas like never before.
You know, when Lorenzo got locked up, you didn't have to step up. You was a fucking child, but you did that shit anyway. And I know I don't say this often, but you're a good son, Kane.
You mean you never say that shit? Say that again. I need to hear that.
You're right, I never say it. But you deserve more than me talking down to you.
Nah, Ma, you did all you can. You know, we turned out all right. Well, at least I did, you know.
But at the end of the day, we family. First, forever.
Now, this episode kicks off with everybody getting ready for this pre-wedding dinner, and you could tell from the jump. This episode focused heavily on Monet and Kane, and the love that they have for each other, despite everything that they've been through, lost, and also said to each other. However, early on it was quite complex, because they weren't quite sure whether they were going to go to this wedding. Monet was still in two minds because of a sham marriage, along with the kind of relationship that she had with Kane at this moment in time. And with Drew and Diana, they were also in two minds. Jeanette was also back from Atlanta for her nephew's wedding, and when I saw Jeanette back with the Tejadas, I did think for a split second whether or not she could end up in the crossfire at the Red Wedding. Luckily for her, she didn't. Over at Stansfield, as Tariq, Effie and Diana were about to sit their exams, Effie finally received her acceptance into Stanford robotics program. In a world which is so dark and full of blood and violence, this was a bit of good news and a sign of hope. But will she make it to Stanford? That's another question entirely, especially after Kane warned her there was no way she could leave the game, and now she also finds herself kidnapping a cop. But we're going to get to that in a bit more detail later on. With Diana, she was finding it tough. Not only did she lose her baby, she also killed her mother and changed a small boy's life forever, and that's why she hasn't been able to concentrate on her studies. That's all she can think about. Now after Tariq's exam, over at the dorm room, we've got Brayden scrolling through Elle's Instagram. But Tariq says that he dodged a bullet, something Ghost would have kind of said to Tommy about Holly. I was also intrigued to see whether Brayden tells Tariq that he told Elle what they did to Steve, but for the moment, he hasn't. So that's just something that could very well become a problem in episode 10. Just as they figure out a way out to deal with Carter, when they've dealt with Noma, one of these murders could come right back around, whether it be Steve, Salim from 404, Junior, or what Davis did with one of Noma's goons later on. I do feel like one death will come back around to haunt at least one person. If I were to predict who, then my money's on Brayden, especially because he still continues to get high on his own supply, even though when Tariq told him not to, he's still not kinda with it 100%. Now this is also where Carter ranked Tariq, where he gets straight down to business, as he always has done ever since season 1.
Just like your father, always eager to get right down to business.
I'm nothing like my father.
Fine.
Whether it be with Simon Stern, Rashad Tate, Davis McLean, or Detective Carter, Tariq always gets straight down to business. Carter wanted him to get a name of a road drug dealer operating out of an amusement park called Vicky's on Staten Island. This also raised question with Drew. His crew questioned whether he was actually Carter's number 2 or was it Tariq, especially considering they had him doing a run to find a new dealer in Staten Island, which of course he wasn't too happy with. Like he told Diana later on, he finally got into this position of power. He loves this power that he has under Carter, the fact that he feels needed and appreciated. And he didn't appreciate that Carter had Tariq out on a run, which should have been his. Of course, Carter was always plotting a more sinister plan. Now, as chess pieces were beginning to make their way across the chessboard, over at the penthouse, we were finally introduced to Noma's brother.
She goes there all the time to visit her brother and never takes me.
Anya made reference to Noma's brother in 406, where I did question, was he the real boss of their organization? And it does seem like Chinadu plays a huge role, maybe even more than Noma, because he did say it was a family enterprise. And as expected, he wasn't happy at the lack of control Noma has in regards to their drug operation. He questioned her need for government contracts, and he also questioned her need to marry Kane so soon after Francesco Lombardi's murder. Now, the simple answers to his concerns were, she can't do business in Milan because there's just way too much heat, especially after the death of Francesco Lombardi, which has hurt her operation in Europe. That's why she's been pushing so hard for these government contracts in the States. But over to this very awkward family dinner, which I think we all expected.
I'm not the only one fucking somebody I ain't supposed to, ma. How about the fact that you fucking some dude named Dante?
Now, the Tejadas do have a history of these sort of sit-down dinners where secrets are tend to be revealed. And in this dinner, it was revealed how Kane doesn't actually own this penthouse. It actually belongs to Monet, who inherited it from Mecca. Another name that popped up in this conversation, something which Noma and Monet have in common. It was also revealed that Noma wasn't the boss after all. The family enterprise seems like it runs a lot deeper than we first thought, and it is something to keep an eye on in episode 10, especially because it's going to be a full-on war. Now, after this very awkward family dinner, Monet had a small conversation with Kane, which did get me thinking, what are they kind of building up to? Maybe if you didn't have Monet die in this episode, then maybe this is the first kind of conversation that might have made you think, can it actually happen? But she couldn't believe that Kane was going to be marrying Noma. She tried to talk him out of it by warning, Noma will never see him as an equal. Kane thinks this is his way of leveling up in the drug world, but in fact, sometimes a mother definitely knows best when it comes to the woman you choose in your life. Let's not get it twisted, Monet definitely is a mother of the year, and despite her putting herself on the line at the end of this episode, we can't forget about all the bad shit that she's done. However, this is the conversation that we were all waiting to see, along with what was revealed by Kane towards the end of the episode. I actually questioned whether we'd see another flashback to kind of unlock this moment, which I do think would have been a lot more powerful, but we did get it in a couple of conversations across episode 9 instead. Monet admitted when Lorenzo got locked up, Kane didn't need to step up the way he did, because he was only a kid, he was a good son, and he deserved more than her talking down to him. And that's the point we've been speaking about for majority of season 4. The way she's treated Kane, the way she spoke to Kane, was very different to the way she spoke to Drew and Diana.
You know what, Kane? I don't know why I keep trying with you. Your dumbass is so fucking pussy whipped, you can't even fucking see straight.
This time in 409, it was very different. It was actually Monet finally showing how much she appreciates her son, how much she does actually care for him. It was always going to be family first, forever. Now, just after this conversation, this is where Noma began to put her and Carter's plan into motion. Carter had already sent Tariq to Staten Island, but they still needed Monet. So, as Monet asked Noma for a large sum of money, she offered her product instead. It was a container out in Staten Island, again, married to the game. And now the writers were really beginning to get the chess game moving. They were hoping that while Tariq and Monet arrived at Staten Island, they would be taken out by the Russians, which we're going to come to in just a second. As the celebrations continued over at the bar, we saw Diana and Drew opening up to each other, although we've already spoken about where Diana is in terms of her mindset. But for Drew, he had a potential fellowship lined up in Paris, and we all know how much Drew loves art. They put a big emphasis on it throughout the series, including season 4. However, one of the themes of this breakdown is how these characters are basically married to the game, and that's what in essence Drew's response was. He said something very similar to what Tariq said to Tasha at the end of season 3. He said he wants his power, he loves this feeling of being untouchable, he loves this power that he has under Carter. In essence, he's basically married to the game. Now this is where Effie came in and where Drew and Diana overheard the mention that her shipment was switched. Apparently, the Russians were going to go to Staten Island, and that's when Drew and Diana started to think, something doesn't seem right. They just had a conversation with Jeanette, who said Monet was also going to Staten Island too. First, Drew heard that Tariq was going to deal with a dealer in Staten Island. Jeanette saying Monet was going to go to Staten Island, and now it was the Russians. It sounded like way too much of a coincidence. But just before we get to Staten Island, we had Kane sleeping with Effie and Noma sleeping with Davis on the other side of New York. However, you could tell the difference. Kane and Effie's was definitely more love, whereas Noma and Davis was the complete opposite, and that's because of the love that these two have for each other. The Throughout season 4, we've seen them together, break up, but then kind of rekindling things even after Kane proposed to Noma. The reason why he wanted to get married to Noma was because he wanted to be up there with Frank Lucas and Nicky Barnes, who used to run the drug trade back in the day, a reference also made by Detective Howard in Raising Kanan.
Rondell Defcon Stark, whose face belongs on the Mount Rushmore kingpins right next to Nicky Barnes and Frank Lucas.
However, he was also honest with how even though he'd be running both sides of the operation, it's still Noma's business, and there was no way for Effie to leave. She was basically married to the game. So, she had a real dilemma. She'd finally been accepted into Stanford, but she couldn't figure out a way from under Noma's thumb, which I think she knew. She already said it before. With Noma, you're either in or out with a bullet. Now, over at Staten Island, Monet and Tariq quickly realized Noma and Carter are now working together. The fact that both of them turned up at the same time, it was a setup. This is where the Russians came in who had Monet and Tariq cornered. If it wasn't for Drew and Diana connecting the dots, they got the jump on the Russians, and this is where they decided to flip the chessboard. It was a perfect moment to play dead and go under the radar for a short while. A chess move that we've seen used so many times across the world of power. They put the Russians in Monet's G-Wagon and lit it up on fire to make it look like it was Monet and Tariq, because by the time forensics could figure out it was the Russians, Monet and Tariq would have already made their move. And that's why Noma wanted to make sure the job was done to perfection, because if it wasn't, they were fucked in more ways than one. And it really was a cold move from Noma, even though it didn't go quite as planned. Not long ago she was playing Happy Families, having dinner with the mother of the man she was marrying, and here she was manipulating Kane into believing Monet was up to her old tricks. It really was cold from a cold-hearted, manipulative bitch. That's what she is, and she definitely has to go in episode 10. Now, emotions were all over the place for Tariq. He's been played, betrayed, manipulated over and over again over the last couple of seasons, and he's finally had enough. He said that he's Tariq St. Patrick, he killed his father, and he's tired of them thinking that they can stand against him. But we all have to agree with Davis MacLean. In these moments, what made Ghost great was the fact that he was able to control his emotions, even though we saw some people having a stranglehold over Ghost, whether it be in the legit world of business or in the streets. He rarely ever showed his emotion or weakness, and that's what Tariq needed to do in this position. He needed to take a step back and just have a think for a moment. Earlier in the season, he said that he needed to use all the good parts of Ghost and all the bad parts, and this is where he had to show it. Now with the Tejadas, they were thinking the same. They were laying low in a motel. Monet said that she really needed the help of Drew and Diana at this moment in time, but they were also grown and they could make their own decisions. For the first time, Monet was actually showing that she'd changed and she was genuinely giving them a choice. She was finally preaching the term family first, but there was also no way Diana and Drew were going to let Monet do this on her own. However, she still needed the help of her thinker.
You're my thinker. Think!
Tariq has always been Monet's thinker. She needed him to come up with a plan to get both Carter and Noma at the same time, because it did have to be done simultaneously. If they got one without the other, there goes their advantage. And the advantage that they had at this moment in time was that Carter and Noma thought they were dead. Now the plan was for the Tejadas to hit Noma after the reception party, where there would be no witnesses and where they could actually cover their tracks. For Detective Carter, Drew revealed they could get Carter while he was doing his confessions over at St. Michael's. He goes every Saturday at 4 o'clock and he's always in the second to last booth. Davis's job was to do his best to distract Noma, and I did actually think twice. Will Davis really have Tariq's back, or could he potentially do what's best for himself? Don't get it twisted, I am glad Davis did have Tariq's back, but because Davis has been towing the fine line between Noma and Tariq, I did wonder for a second. But just like he said in 408.
I mean, you two aren't any better. With that being said, my allegiance is with you.
Now Tariq also needed the help of Brayden and Effie. Even though he didn't want Brayden anywhere near this mission, Monet made him realize he's got no choice. However, he did also warn Brayden, no drugs. He needed to keep his mind clean for what they were about to do. They needed to disable the recording function while Tariq gets the drop on Carter. Now the reason why Effie was down was because it also benefits her end goal. If they were able to take down both Detective Carter and Noma, as crazy as it sounds, she'll then have a freedom to go to Stanford. That was her motivation. Now Davis MacLean was certainly playing his part in more ways than one. The way lawyers can kinda distract you is by burying you in paperwork and more paperwork, and that's what his plan was. But as he overheard Noma's bodyguards talking about how they haven't heard from the Russians, he had to think quick. He made up a bullshit story of how Noma wanted them to go check out a spot where the Russians were last seen, and as Davis was driving, I think we all knew what he was about to do. He had no choice but to get his hands dirty. It was a bit of a tussle at the beginning, but there was no way Noma's goon was going to get the better of Davis. Now this is where I just want to kind of refer it back to the point I made during this conversation between Brayden and Tariq. I mentioned how I wouldn't be surprised if one of these bodies comes back, either Salim, Steve, or maybe even this one, which you can add to the list. Who's to say this one doesn't come back onto Davis and he doesn't end up in handcuffs come the end of season 4? It's definitely a possibility. We did see him turn up at Noma's wedding in a different suit, but can they trace this one back to Davis? It's just a thought, because there are a lot of bodies that have dropped in season 4, and you have to think, at least one may end up coming back to haunt them. Now, as Noma and Kane tie the knot in a power wedding, we see Effie and Brayden on their mission to disable the recording function over at St. Michael's. As usual, Effie was doing what needed to be done, while Brayden in the back was taking yet another bump, something Tariq warned him not to do. In these moments, you do have to have a clear mind, just like Tariq had to control his emotions. Now, as Carter came in and took his seat in his usual booth, Tariq was perfectly positioned to finally get one up on Detective Carter. However, this is where Carter let him know that he knows he's the one who killed Zion, him and his little friend. He's got this whole thing on CCTV, which is where he actually turned the tables on Tariq. He was just way too quick and way too strong for Tariq, as he should be. Now, as he put the cuffs on Tariq and took him away, Brayden and Effie had to think quick. Meanwhile, Monet knew that she had to get to the wedding, because if Carter knew that Tariq was alive, that information would have been fed back to Noma. It would have also put her kids in danger, and there was no way Monet was going to let Noma get to her kids. With Brayden and Effie, they chased down Detective Carter in a very risky move. I have to say, very crazy and risky, considering Tariq was also in the back. Brayden slams into the side of Detective Carter's car, making him go straight into a stationary lorry. Now, as they have Detective Carter tied up in a warehouse, he does warn them. If his team doesn't hear from them, the NYPD will burn down the city to try and find him. He also has a CCTV of Tariq and Brayden killing Zion, and that's another problem entirely. So, just like Carter questioned, what's Tariq's next move? What chess move do Brayden, Effie, and Tariq come up with? All of them are pretty much fucked, unless they come up with a plan. Now, I did warn when we first saw this trailer for episode 9, the plan won't work if they don't get Noma and Carter together. They had to get both of them at the same time. So, even though we could see that they had Detective Carter, they still had to somehow deal with Noma, who was also beginning to question Kane's loyalty. In the middle of their wedding dance and celebrations, Noma questioned Kane whether he was in on what was going on in the background while they were getting married, which Kane was actually oblivious to. At this moment in time, Kane had no idea what happened over at Staten Island with the Russians, with Detective Carter or Noma's plan to take his mother off the chessboard. But she did give him a choice to make. He was either with Monet or he was with Noma, as he helplessly looked around as Drew, Diana, and her cousins were taken away by Monet's bodyguards, which was kind of a throwback to what we saw play out in Power with Milan. Ghost had Milan at gunpoint in the middle of Club Truth, while all his men were ambushed by Dre and his crew. Now, as Noma and her brother took Kane away in the middle of their celebrations, Monet arrived just in time. She first rescued Drew and Diana, but the job wasn't done because they still had to rescue Kane. She did tell Drew and Diana to get out of there, she'll deal with this on her own, but Diana said to Hardest first, they were in this together. And if you didn't realize that one of them was about to go, then this should have given you all the clues you needed. This conversation here, you knew one of them was definitely about to go, and it had to be Monet, because of how they built her character, her conversations which date all the way back to 401. She was always on borrowed time because of what she'd done in the past, and also because of how she finally managed to change her stubborn old ways. There was just no way Power were going to let the Tejadas live happily ever after, not after all the bullshit that Monet's done. I also have to say, I do love the choice of song that they decided to use while Monet was on her shit during the back end of this episode, Tupac Hail Mary. I did think the choice of song was perfect, but as we saw Monet on this crazy killing spree, we had Kane being tied up by Noma. The fact that Monet and Tariq were still alive made Noma think that Kane might have been in on the whole plan to attack her and Carter, which of course wasn't the case. She wanted Kane to make a choice here and now. She said that Kane will never be his own man until Monet is truly gone. With her, he could have a partnership, but he needed to make the right choice. However, what have we learned about Kane over the last couple of seasons? He may have started Ghost being a hothead. He may have made countless of reckless decisions that have made things worse for his family and his mother. But when push comes to shove, he is family first, more so when Lorenzo was taken off the chessboard. Even though Monet was the one who got rid of his father, he still stuck by her side because Monet was there for him when he was younger. Kane was spitting a lot of facts. Growing up in these streets, you run the risk of getting hurt. and there was a moment where Kane couldn't protect himself, but Monet did. Monet was the only person. She was the only person that could protect him when nobody else could. I did once reference a few quotes from Woody McLean, who did hint at him potentially being molested when he was a child, and Monet was there for him when something super important and super significant happened in his life when he was younger. It was just his mother Monet who was there for him. We've all been kind of wondering, why is Kane such a mama's boy? Well, this gives us our answer. This was also Kane's turn in trying to protecting his mother instead of the other way around. However, just on the other side of this door, Monet heard everything. How Kane decided to be family first, Kane's loyalty, Kane choosing to side with Monet over Noma, and in that moment, Monet decided it was her turn to protect Kane once again. She came in all guns blazing on her own. She had her back against the wall, and in that moment, Noma made the call to have Kane taken out. But there was no way Monet was going to let that happen. She didn't even have to think twice. There was no way she was going to let Noma kill her son. So, everything that she's been preaching about being family first, this is where she showed it. This is where she sacrificed herself to save and protect Kane, just like she did when he was a kid. And down goes Monet. Kane had to watch on as Noma and the goons killed his mother right in front of his very eyes, with Kane tied up, unable to help, with Drew and Diana also unable to help, as Monet uttered her last words, her babies. Now going forward, you can bet, all hell is about to break loose. Noma definitely has to go, but I do think this death will cause further tension between the family, with potentially Drew blaming Kane. But one thing's for sure, they do need to put the blame to one side and end this once and for all. But can they do it? Or will Noma get away and potentially flee to London? Drop all your thoughts and predictions down below in the comment section, and as always, thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you next time.